These weren't filmed to entertain, they were filmed too close to the truth. So why do some Vietnam War movies feel controlled, while others feel disturbingly real? Because hidden inside a few of them are tactics so accurate they stop feeling like scenes and start feeling like memories. In this video, you'll see the moments where cinema stops acting and starts revealing how the war actually worked. And by the end, one of these won't feel like a movie at all. It'll feel like something you weren't meant to witness. We Were Soldiers, 2002. It looks like a controlled insertion until control never fully arrives. Helicopters don't just deliver troops, they expose them. The moment boots hit landing zone X-ray, the unit isn't complete, the perimeter isn't secure, and the battlefield isn't understood. Okay, and that's the first mistake most films hide. This one doesn't. Soldiers arrive in waves, not as a unified force, creating gaps the enemy doesn't ignore. They exploit. Contact doesn't begin at a distance. It happens almost immediately, from multiple directions, collapsing the illusion of space. What makes this depiction tactically accurate is how quickly structure breaks. Communication stretches thin, units lose visual connection, and before leadership can stabilize the situation, they're already reacting instead of planning. The North Vietnamese don't charge, they close distance strategically, neutralizing air superiority by staying close, forcing the fight into proximity. And once that happens, movement stops meaning progress. It becomes exposure. So the tactic shifts. Not advance, not retreat. Hold. Build a perimeter under pressure. Reinforce gaps. Survive long enough for the next wave to matter. Because in Vietnam, insertion wasn't dominance. It was risk. And the real battle didn't start when you engaged the enemy. It started the moment you landed and realized you weren't alone. Platoon. Platoon, 1986. It doesn't feel like combat. It feels like something waiting to happen, and that's exactly why it works. Platoon strips away spectacle and replaces it with something quieter, tension built through uncertainty. Patrol formations aren't rigid or cinematic. They're stretched, uneven, constantly adapting to terrain that limits visibility and distorts sound. Soldiers don't move with confidence. They move with hesitation because hesitation is survival. Every step forward isn't progress. It's a question. What's ahead? What's hidden? What hasn't moved yet? And when contact finally happens, it doesn't escalate. It explodes. Short bursts of violence. No clear front line. No controlled engagement. Just fragments of action happening faster than they can be processed. That's what the film understands. Combat in Vietnam wasn't sustained. It was sudden, disruptive, and often over before you understood it. Even leadership feels uncertain. Orders are given, but the environment doesn't cooperate. Jungle absorbs sound, blocks sight lines, and removes spatial awareness. You don't know where the enemy is until they decide you should, and by then it's already too late to prepare. Because in Vietnam, you weren't advancing toward a visible threat. You were moving through space where the threat decided when it existed.
Anybody? Negative contact! Sergeant!
Hamburger Hill, 1987. It looks like a single objective until it becomes a repeated cost. There's no tactical elegance here, no strategic breakthrough, just a hill and the decision to take it again and again and again. That repetition is what makes it real. Units advance uphill through mud that slows movement, drains energy, and breaks formation. Visibility is limited, coordination fades, and before momentum can build, contact stops everything. Then it resets, and it happens again. What this film captures is attrition, not progress. Movement isn't measured in success. It's measured in how far you get before being forced back. And every attempt carries memory. The knowledge that this has already failed before doesn't stop the next assault. It defines it. Because orders don't change just because outcomes do. The enemy doesn't chase. They hold position, forcing attackers into exposure every time they move upward. And that creates a psychological layer most films ignore. You're not just fighting the enemy. You're fighting the repetition, the understanding that effort doesn't guarantee result. And even when ground is taken, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels temporary because the cost doesn't decrease, the resistance doesn't weaken, and the terrain doesn't change. So the real question isn't whether the hill can be taken, it's how many times you can afford to try before there's nothing left to send forward. Full Metal Jacket, 1987. It changes location, and suddenly everything you understood stops working. Urban combat doesn't follow jungle rules, and this film doesn't pretend it does. The city of Hue isn't open, it's broken into fragments. Walls block vision. Buildings create blind angles. Windows become threats, and distance disappears. That's what makes it dangerous. Soldiers don't move forward with structure. They hesitate, split, regroup. Every step is taken without full awareness of where the threat is. And that uncertainty creates mistakes. The sniper sequence isn't dramatic, it's disorienting. Shots come from an unclear position. Units react without direction. Time stretches not because nothing is happening, but because everything is happening without clarity. That's the shift. Close proximity doesn't create control. It removes it. Because the enemy isn't far away, they're embedded within the environment, and the environment doesn't reveal them easily. What the film gets right is how quickly plans collapse. Structure disappears. Communication fragments. And trained responses start to fail under pressure. Because urban combat isn't about advancing into enemy territory. It's about surviving inside it. And once you're inside, every angle matters. Every movement exposes something, and every delay carries risk you can't fully calculate.
300 infantry.
If this tank is any...
Apocalypse Now, 1979. It feels surreal until you focus on what's actually happening. Beneath the chaos, there's a system, riverine warfare that operates without stable direction or predictable control. Patrol boats don't dominate the environment. They move through it, exposed from every angle that matters. Narrow waterways restrict maneuverability. Dense jungle lines both sides. Visibility changes with every turn, and when contact happens, it doesn't build, it interrupts. Suddenly. Completely. That's what makes it accurate. Now there's no front line, no clear engagement zone, only movement through space where threat can emerge from anywhere at any time. And once it does, reaction replaces planning. The crew doesn't control the battle. They respond to it, because control requires awareness. And awareness is limited. Every decision is made with partial information. Every movement carries risk, and every stop increases vulnerability. What the film understands is that terrain isn't just background. It's active. It shapes behavior. It dictates timing. It removes predictability. Because in Vietnam, the battlefield didn't wait for you to understand it. It shifted constantly. And the moment you thought you had control was usually the moment you lost it. Continuing next entries in same 250-word paragraph style.
Wrong.
Destination's classified. I carry priority.
How fast is everybody gonna range it?
The Thin Red Line, 1998, or It Looks Calm, and that calm is the warning. Movement through tall grass feels controlled, almost slow enough to understand, but that's the illusion. Visibility is broken, communication is reduced, and awareness becomes fragmented the moment you step forward. Soldiers don't rush, they space out, scan, pause, not because they're unsure, but because speed removes control, and control is already limited. Concealment works both ways. You can't be seen, but you also can't see. And that balance creates tension that doesn't need action to exist, because action can begin at any second without warning. What this film captures is hesitation as a survival tool. Pauses aren't delays, they're decisions. Calculations made without full information. And once contact begins, that structure disappears instantly. Engagement is sudden, directionless, are fragmented into reactions that don't connect cleanly. Because visibility defined the movement, and once it's gone, so is coordination. The battlefield stops being a place you navigate. It becomes something you interpret in real time, and interpretation isn't always correct, because the moment you think you understand what's ahead is often the moment you've already misread it. Casualties of War, 1989. It feels uneventful, and that's what makes it dangerous. Patrol isn't designed to be dramatic. It's repetitive, slow, and constantly exposed, and that's exactly how this film presents it. Soldiers move with deliberate spacing, not too close, not too far, because distance defines survival. Too close and one burst hits multiple targets. Too far and communication fails. So units stretch visually, but remain tactically connected. What makes this realistic isn't action, it's absence of it. Because most of Vietnam wasn't constant combat. It was waiting, listening, moving through terrain that didn't offer clarity or advantage. Every sound matters, every silence feels intentional, and every step forward carries uncertainty that doesn't resolve immediately. You don't know if you're safe. You only know nothing has happened yet, and that yet becomes the tension, because engagement doesn't announce itself. It interrupts, and until it does, everything feels suspended. What the film understands is that psychological pressure builds without visible threat, because the longer nothing happens, the more you expect something to. And that expectation changes how you move, how you think, how you react. Because in Vietnam, the absence of combat wasn't relief, it was a delay.
Rolling.
Rescue Dawn, 2006. It removes the battlefield and replaces it with something harder to survive. There's no unit here, no perimeter, no support system waiting just out of frame, just terrain, and the constant risk of being seen inside it. That's what makes this film tactically accurate in a different way. It doesn't show combat, it shows what happens after combat fails. Movement isn't direct, it's cautious, uneven, constantly adjusting to avoid detection rather than reach a destination. Because speed creates noise, and noise creates exposure. So survival depends on something slower. Patience, awareness, restraint. Navigation becomes instinctive, not strategic. There are no maps that matter here, only immediate decisions. Where to step, when to stop, what to risk for food, for water, for direction. And every decision carries consequence that doesn't reset, because there's no backup plan. What the film understands is isolation is pressure. No communication, no reinforcement, no guarantee of extraction, just distance, and the awareness that every mistake compounds into the next. Survival isn't one moment, It's a chain of them, and breaking that chain even once can end everything. Because in Vietnam, being alive behind enemy lines wasn't safety. It was exposure without support, stretched over time.
For another man.
No, wait.
Behind you from the line units for this chopper.
Attack! Fucker, attack! 10 o'clock.
84C MoPic, 1989. It doesn't feel like a movie because it refuses to organize itself like one. There's no clear structure guiding what you see. No dramatic buildup preparing you for what's coming. Just movement, uneven, uncertain, constantly shifting through terrain that doesn't explain itself. And that's exactly what makes it accurate. Patrol isn't clean. It isn't cinematic. It's fragmented, with soldiers adjusting spacing, direction, and awareness based on variables they don't fully understand. And then the shift happens. Not gradually, not predictably, instantly. An ambush doesn't announce itself. It interrupts. Gunfire breaks rhythm without warning. Communication overlaps into noise. Direction disappears. And within seconds, the unit is reacting instead of thinking. That confusion isn't exaggerated. It's the tactic itself. Because ambush removes preparation entirely. It replaces planning with instinct. And instinct isn't always coordinated. What the film captures is how quickly structure collapses under pressure. Orders lose clarity, movement loses direction, and survival becomes immediate, not strategic. Because in that moment, there's no time to understand what's happening, only to respond to it. And response, by definition, comes too late to be perfect. That's the reality most films smooth out. This one doesn't. It lets the confusion exist. Exactly as it would.
Plus fourth-class machine gunner.
Back up to this village.
So far, they just Article 15 me to death.
Heavy contact!
Danger Close. The Battle of Long Tan, 2019. It looks like a defensive position until defense turns into something far more fragile. Calculation under pressure where every second matters and every decision carries immediate consequence. Outnumbered units don't rely on movement here because movement creates exposure they can't afford. Instead, they rely on coordination so precise that even the smallest delay begins to unravel everything. And that's what this film understands better than most. Once contact begins, it doesn't build slowly. It compresses time. Pressure arrives instantly, forcing decisions that don't allow hesitation or correction. Artillery becomes the center of survival, not as distant support, but as something dangerously close, something that protects and threatens at the same time. Calls are made under stress, coordinates adjusted mid-chaos, and the margin for error disappears completely. Because danger close isn't just terminology, it's risk measured in meters, where a slight miscalculation doesn't just fail, it destroys. Fire lands near friendly positions, close enough to stop the enemy, but close enough to become the next problem. And that tension never releases. Every round that saves lives carries the possibility of ending them. What makes this depiction accurate is how tightly everything connects. Communication, timing, positioning, each depends on the other. Yes, and if one breaks, the entire structure begins to collapse instantly. There's no space to recover slowly, no time to rethink, because the situation doesn't pause, it intensifies. What the film reveals is that survival in these moments isn't about strength or dominance, it's about precision under pressure. And precision, when everything is moving, slipping, and breaking at once, becomes harder to maintain with every second that passes.
Good, boss.
Bat 21, 1988. It's not about fighting, It's about surviving long enough to be found and realizing that survival depends on forces you don't control. A downed pilot doesn't dictate movement, timing, or visibility. Everything shifts away from action and into coordination, a system that moves slower than danger itself. And that's what this film captures with unsettling accuracy. Survival becomes a balance between opposing needs. You have to stay hidden to avoid detection, but also visible enough to be located. And that balance never stabilizes. Every choice shifts risk in a different direction. Radio communication becomes the only thread connecting isolation to rescue, but even that thread is unstable. Signals distort. Positions change. Information arrives incomplete, forcing decisions to be made without certainty. And those decisions don't resolve quickly. What makes this realistic is the delay built into everything. Rescue isn't immediate. It's calculated, layered, and constantly adjusted based on changing conditions. Every movement toward extraction increases exposure, not just for the pilot, but for everyone involved in reaching him, because saving one person can risk many more. And that reality slows everything down, because speed creates mistakes, and mistakes expand consequences beyond control. What the film understands is that survival isn't always about taking action. Sometimes it's about restraint, doing less, staying still, waiting longer than feels possible. Because time here isn't neutral. It builds pressure with every passing moment, stretching uncertainty into something heavier. And the longer you remain unfound, the more every decision begins to matter in ways you can't fully predict. The Outpost, 2019. It looks like a fortified position until you understand the one detail that changes everything, where it is. And once that becomes clear, the outcome starts to feel less like a possibility and more like an inevitability waiting to unfold. Position defines outcome, and sometimes that position is compromised before the first shot is fired. Surrounded by higher ground, the outpost isn't protected, it's exposed, visible from every direction that matters. Every movement inside it can be observed. Every defensive position is already known. And when the attack begins, it doesn't feel sudden. It feels like something that was always going to happen. What makes this film tactically accurate is how little movement can actually fix, because there's nowhere safe to reposition, no terrain advantage to reclaim. Defense doesn't expand outward, it contracts inward, tightening under pressure. Units don't advance, they hold, contain, and react, and that reaction becomes the only option left. Communication struggles to keep pace with the intensity. Support exists, but it doesn't arrive fast enough to change the immediate reality. Visibility is limited. Noise overwhelms clarity, and every second stretches under sustained engagement that doesn't allow space to think, only to respond. What the film captures is vulnerability. Not weakness, but exposure built into the environment itself. Because sometimes the battlefield isn't something you enter, it's something you're placed inside of without full control. And once you're there, options don't disappear gradually. They collapse. One by one, faster than decisions can replace them. That's the reality it presents. Not strategy, not control, just survival inside a position that was never truly defensible to begin with. These weren't just films. They were fragments of reality captured too closely. Every tactic, every hesitation, every mistake reveals something deeper about how that war actually functioned. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you want more breakdowns that expose what movies get disturbingly right, like, share, and subscribe, because some stories aren't just told, they're uncovered.
The way, man.